Good afternoon, everybody. This is the first of what we hope will be a series of programs designed to educate people in the veteran community on what we're seeing as emerging issues. So today's program, Love is a Battlefield, addresses an issue that we're seeing more frequently among our older veterans, romance scams. We're going to talk about some other scams as well, but the thrust of the program today is going to be romance scams. We're going to talk about how you can identify a romance scam. Many of us may have experience with veterans that we serve, being involved in these kind of scams, tips on how to have a conversation with someone you feel may be a victim or a target of a romance scam, and then how we can help victims rebuild. So just by way of introduction, my name is Don Hayes. I'm an attorney and director at the South Royalton Legal Clinic. The clinic houses a program many of you are familiar with, the Veterans Legal Assistance Project. The VLAP program, Veterans Legal Assistance, is a grant funder program providing free legal services to Vermont veterans. The South Royalton Legal Clinic itself, and there's a picture of it right there, a relatively new building, has been serving the community since 1979. VLAP, the Veterans Legal Assistance Project, started in 2014, and since then we've served over 700 veterans in Vermont with a variety of issues, benefit appeals, Social Security disability appeals, bankruptcy, foreclosure defense, landlord-tenant, simple estate planning, expungements, and more. There will be an opportunity, by the way, I'll do a little Q&A at the end, so hopefully we'll get through the program. And if you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat, but we will do a Q&A at the very end. So first, let's talk about these scams. We're seeing more and more. In fact, the statistics are really alarming, how the number of older individuals are being targeted by these scams. We're going to run through a list of some of the more common, but then again, focus on the romance scams. But we've gotten a lot of referrals lately from folks that have, case managers and social workers who believe they may be working with a veteran who's a victim of one of these scams. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is out there, and they're a big consumer advocate group. The FBI is also out there. Vermont's Attorney General is out there providing support and a place that we can lodge complaints and make reports. But the number of adults, so the FBI in a report they released in 2022 indicated that there were 88,262 complaints of financial scams, including romance scams, resulting in $3.1 billion in losses. Now, it's important to think about this, is these are complaints that were actually filed. As we're going to talk about, romance scams, one of the things that makes them really difficult to pursue is the fact that they often go unreported. The people who are victims of these romance scams are not necessarily willing to disclose. So the 88,000 complaints that are out there, which includes all sorts of other scams, are really just people who decided to take it to the next level and file a complaint. These scams, in many instances, are targeting older adults. And for many of the scammers, they believe that the older population has money in the bank and has resources that can be exploited. And as I just mentioned, a lot of these things go unreported, and they're very difficult to prosecute. We're going to talk about the very end when it comes to what we can do to help somebody rebuild. One of the big issues we run into is that there's usually nobody to pursue. You can file a complaint, and in some instances, depending on the kind of scam, you may be able to recover some money. But most of these romance scams, the money is just gone, and it's very difficult to prosecute or pursue anybody for recovery. So let's just do a quick laundry list. These are some of the more common scams that you're going to see out there. The business impersonator scam, the individual, the target will get a call or an email or a text message that looks like it's coming from a business that the individual knows. They may say that there's a problem with your account or that you won a prize, and then it'll provide some information to either call a number or to click a link. And usually that's, that sends the target or the victim down a rabbit hole that could lead to the disclosure of personal information, that furthers the scam. The charity fraud, you get a call from, somebody who claims to be with a charity, and they pressure you to donate. Some of the telltales of this, if the charity is asking for things like gift cards or wire transfers, it's probably not the real charity that you intended to donate to. But again, these scams are common. And you can see with many of these, the thing is trying to exploit a vulnerability. The government impersonator scam, for example. The individual or the target or the victim will get a call or an email, a text message from someone that says they're with the IRS or the Social Security Administration. And they'll say something like your Social Security number has been suspended, which is, obviously not true. Your Social Security number can't be suspended, but there's a sense of urgency that's introduced. And oftentimes the scammers will convince the victim or the target to disclose personal information that can then be used in the dark web or things of that nature to open up accounts and things of that nature. This is one of the more common scams. We probably all know people who've been impacted by this or approached. I mean, I myself have even gotten calls, along these lines. So we can all be vulnerable. The grandkid and the family scam is another one where an individual will get a phone call from somebody who claims to be a family member, and they'll usually have some sort of urgent request, like I'm in jail or whatever, and I need, bail money. Can you help out? Usually the victim will, the scammer will just give enough information that the victim may feel as though there is a connection, that it could in fact be a family member or a grandkid, and may in fact end up disclosing information or sending cash. This is another one that's really popular, and it preys on the hearts of the grandparents that are out there. The health insurance scams, these are ones that the FTC really has gone after, where there may be advertisements, there may be text messages or emails that indicate an issue with either discount on health insurance, or maybe an issue with your health insurance that prompts the victim to click a link and ultimately disclose personal information. The home repair scams, it's another really common one where a contractor may show up on the doorstep promising to do all kinds of work, and will collect money up front, and then will either not do the work or will do it in a substandard way. Those we have gotten involved in, and we've been able to get some recovery for individuals. But again, in many of these, they could be fly-by-night operations that are just moving into a town. They target what they believe to be vulnerable adults. They approach them, with these fake home improvement or home repair projects, get the money up front, or even in some cases help arrange for financing, and then they leave town. Identity theft. Obviously, the identity theft is somebody, we can all be victim to these things. Somebody gets a hold of your personal information and then uses it to run up charges or open up accounts in your name. Investment scams, the get-rich-quick things that may pop up, and I've seen these a lot in various social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, things of that nature, where you'll see a flash from somebody that says, "Oh my gosh, I'm earning $50,000 in passive income per month. You can do it too." Oftentimes, those job scams or money-making scams will come with some, if you really want to get the secret, you're going to have to pay a certain amount of money, to do this training or whatever, and then it never really materializes. The tech support scam, another super common one, where you may get a pop-up or some sort of correspondence that indicates there's an issue with your computer and you need to click here or whatever. In some instances, and I've had this happen to a few clients, where they turn over control of their computer to the scammer, and the scammer is able to very quickly mine the computer for personal information. They may convince the victim to purchase software or things of that nature. But they're, again, these scams are exploiting sort of vulnerability. An older population may not be that familiar with technology, and all of a sudden a pop-up says, flashes on the screen that says, your computer has been compromised, click here. And they're only a click away from opening the computer up to the scammer. The unwanted call, this is one that I think is really interesting, that you may get a call from, a random number. And, many of us, we've gotten accustomed to the robocalls, and if it's not a number that we immediately identify, we let it go to voicemail, and then we can, listen to the voicemail and decide that we want to respond. But for some individuals, the unwanted calls come in, and the scammer will say, "Can you hear me?" And the person on the other end will respond, "Yes, yes." And now the scammer actually has a voice capture of that individual, that to the extent that they're banking programs or any kind of programs that require authentication, they now have a voice signature that can be used to further exploit the victim. The You've Won scam is another popular one. You'll get correspondence that indicates you've won prize or something along those lines, but you need to pay the taxes or, the royalty, whatever. You need to furnish some funds, additional funds, to actually claim the prize. And then finally, the romance scams. And that's obviously what we're going to talk about today. And these are really, again, we've seen quite a few of these pop up in recent years. Veterans in particular, older veterans being exploited by these. And these are scams where someone, expresses an interest in getting to know you, a relationship is formed, and then very quickly the relationship turns to exploitation. And we're going to obviously go into that in a lot more detail. I'm going to have some resources that I posted at the end of the program. The Federal Trade Commission has a great Pass It On program, which in fact has literature on each of these scams that's available for download. Really nice sheets that you can download if you suspect that somebody's been involved in, identity theft or tech support. It's got a nice little sheet that explains what the scam is, how the scam operates, and then provides information on how you can report it. Again, with most of these scams, you're going to find that recovery is oftentimes not possible. And as we're going to talk about today, and it comes up in a few instances, the best offense is a good defense. Being able to identify when somebody may be a victim of one of these scams, and then being able to act quickly to get them to respond or lock down their finances. So the rise of romance scams, and again, the statistics are kind of alarming. 2022 report, 70,000 reported romance scams with a loss of $1.3 billion. The average loss for folks 70 and older, well, the median losses is $9,475.80, which is an alarming number. Somebody who's on fixed income, doesn't have a ton of savings, these romance scams the exploitation can take place over, a fairly extended period of time. And it's not as though somebody is writing a check for $9,000. It's, $100 worth of gift cards one day. It's, maybe $500 in cash, through a Western Union. It's taking place over a period of time before the victim realizes that they are being scammed. And they're becoming much, much more difficult to detect because of AI. We've all heard about AI, but now AI is getting to the point where you can actually have, some of these images. One of the defenses we use, for example, is to do reverse image search. If you see a profile picture of somebody, you can do a reverse image search, and you can find out who that person actually is or where that picture has previously been used. AI has the ability to generate images, and not only generate images, but generate images that you can correspond with. So that's going to make it's not so much an issue today, but I can almost guarantee in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to be talking a lot about people who are convinced that they're in relationships because they're having conversations with somebody that turns out to be just an AI generated avatar. So we're going to see that, I think, much more, and it's going to make it much more difficult to weed out when somebody is being scammed. So what do the scams look like? Again, we probably have had experience in dealing with veterans. It's generally going to be a relationship that is occurring exclusively online or through some online social media or messaging type platform. We're going to see that it's an individual who is feeling lonely, is spending time on the internet, and suddenly gets interest from somebody, and that interest is enough to initiate contact. In fact, 40% of people who've claimed to lost money to one of these scams report that it started on social media, that they were just in a social media platform, and they perhaps disclosed enough information that somebody was able to take the conversation to the next step. Very few of these actually start on, 20% is still a good number, start on dating apps. So the romance scams that we're seeing are not necessarily started from a swipe left or swipe right. They're started from some social media platform where there may be community messaging boards or things of that nature, where the scammer is able to get enough information that they're able to exploit that weakness. And if they get a response, if you think about if you get a message from somebody, it even happens through a text message. You get a text message from, a number or an individual that you don't know. Most of us will just delete the message. But individuals who are vulnerable, feeling lonely, looking for some type of connection may respond to that. And that's all the scammer needs, to start down this path. The conversation will quickly progress to exploitation. Even though these romance scams take a lot of time the scammer has to invest a good bit of time in conversation and things of that nature. But once it turns to exploitation, it tends to move pretty quickly. So the life cycle of a scam, the life cycle of these things is really kind of predictable. And you'll see, these 10 steps, it's really, now I'm hoping nobody's going to use this information to become a scammer themselves. But if you were, this is the blueprint. You create a fake identity, a fake profile. And the profile is going to, create basically attractive or convincing stories about the individual, and those will be posted, in various social media platforms or dating platforms. Then the scammer is going to move to identify potential matches or potential targets, and these are going to be folks that maybe disclose. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about people's footprint online, how much information might actually be out there about you. If you're posting on social media or things of that nature, if you're saying that you're lonely or whatever, that information can be exploited by the scammers, and the scammers begin to profile potential victims, and then it's easy enough for them to initiate contact. The message could be as simple as a hello in a chat program, and next thing you know, the victim is responding and the conversation begins. The relationship building piece is really critical. The relationship building is really where the scammer is going to exploit that vulnerability. They're looking to form a relationship. We use the expression love bomb. There's going to be a really quick escalation of romantic feelings. The person will just lavish the victim with excessive flattery, affection, praise early in the relationship, things that would ordinarily take a lot of time to develop in a 3D kind of relationship will happen very quickly. Once that relationship is built, the scammer is then going to use love to manipulate, right? They're creating basically a sense of dependency, emotional dependency, which is going to be very difficult, for somebody who is feeling lonely or isolated. It's going to be very difficult for that person to withdraw from the relationship. There's going to be an emotional dependency that's developed. Once that dependency is developed, the individual will start to share stories that seem personal as a way of eliciting sympathy and deepen the bond. Once the target falls in love, so to speak, with the scammer then will take steps to keep that person engaged. And oftentimes, where it's going to turn in 6 is creating that sense of urgency, creating some type of, I can't travel. I need, I need to go to the doctor. I'm having problems with my business, or I'm having trouble with investments or things of that nature. There's going to be some sort of fabricated crisis or urgent situation that's going to be used to then manipulate the target into providing financial assistance. And then it's going to cross the line. There's going to be that request for money. And I haven't seen many folks that have been, where we get into cryptocurrencies, but that could be. It's going to be cryptocurrency. It's going to be wire transfers. The thing I'm seeing more commonly is prepaid debit cards and gift cards and things of that nature. They're virtually untraceable. The scammer is going to come up with some plausible explanation as to why they can't get to the funds. Maybe money is being held up, in a third-party account or something like that, and the scammer can't get to it. But geez, there's a ton of money there, and if you can help me kind of float this situation, I'll pay you back, as quickly as I can. And of course, because the victim or the target has been manipulated, because there's this bond, this emotional dependency, and this sense of urgency, oftentimes the victim is going to ignore all the potential warning signs, all the potential red flags, and start to give the money. And once they give the money, once the scammer has somebody who is giving money and seems to be willing to do so, it will escalate. And these are, this is kind of end game stuff. The scammer is literally just hanging in as long as they can. They're taking steps to avoid detection. They don't want, they're using like VPNs. They're, really trying to cover their tracks. They're providing some details to form a connection, but not enough details, to really have the victim locate them. Once the money is gone, or once the victim figures out that they're being scammed, the scam ends. And although the scam ends, oftentimes the scammer has collected enough personal information, and that information has value. And they may try some additional ditch efforts to exploit further money from the victim, which could be, changing direct deposits, opening up accounts in the person's name, things of that nature. So, once the direct funding, the gift cards, the crypto, the wire transfers, once that stuff stops, it's not necessarily the end of the scam. The scam may continue through other types of exploitation. So with these life cycles, and you can see, this doesn't happen overnight. These relationships take place over a period of time. And, the scammer really does kind of work the room to make sure that they've got their claws into the victim. So what do we look for? I mentioned the love bomb before. So, if you're dealing with somebody who you think might be a victim of this, these are some of the signs that are pretty evident. A relationship that escalates very quickly, that goes to "I love you" or proposals, marriage promises, things of that nature, from 2 or 3 conversations. All of a sudden, again, that idea of lavishing affection and things of that nature for somebody that is lonely, that can be really appealing. Having somebody that they can talk to, somebody that they can call a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner, it's going to be really, difficult for that person to pull away. There may be a claim that they're a native speaker, but the communication, whether it's, if you're actually talking to somebody over the phone or emails or text messages, it's going to indicate otherwise. There's going to be, poor usage of grammar, spelling mistakes, things of that nature. You'll notice inconsistencies between, the profile. If the victim or the target remembers what the profile actually was. Again, one of the devices, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's kind of an interesting aspect of these romance scams. They may start in some sort of, platform, social media platform, but then they will very quickly move to like a private chat program. So they're kind of taken out of the social media platform, whatever it is, and moved into some other private chat, which is a way for the scammer to further isolate the victim. So oftentimes, once the relationship is started, the profile is just the bait. And then once the scammer has their hooks into the target or the victim, they're going to move on to a different communication platform that is going to be exclusive. And now the target, isn't necessarily thinking of the profile that attracted them in the first place. But if they were to, they would probably notice inconsistencies between what the profile is represented and what story they're telling or they're fabricating, to further the scam. The big one is a refusal to video chat. And again, I think this is going to change. With the advent of AI, I think we're going to start to see more sophisticated scams, and it's going to be more difficult to track these folks down. So it does go to the best offense is a good defense. But the refusal to video chat is a big one. Every person that's been scammed that I've dealt with has had that exact thing happen, that there has been no video chat. It has been a relationship that is purely taking place online. There may be videos that the scammer provides to the victim, but they're not. It's not a synchronous, conversation. And then this is another big one that I think is consistent with all of the ones we've dealt with: promises to visit that never materialize. And in fact, the victim or the target may send funds to the scammer to buy plane tickets and things of that nature to come up, but then there's always some last minute excuse why it never happens. So how do we tell, if somebody is a victim? These are not things if somebody is involved in a relationship, they may want to share that kind of information. So, the target may hint at being, both positively and negatively about being in a relationship. If all of a sudden the victim or the target is talking about, well, let me check with, my partner on something like that, that may be an indication. If in any of your previous conversations, a relationship has not come up, that may be, an indication. We're going to see changes in behavior, and a lot of individuals will turn to the internet after some significant emotional event. Could be the loss of a spouse. It could be, a change in housing circumstances. It could be a move. Somebody can move from a community that they maybe have connections in, but now, just as a result of housing instability, they move into another neighborhood or another community, and now maybe, they're feeling a little bit more vulnerable and seeking out connections. So if you observe changes in behavior after an emotional, significant emotional event that is not necessarily attributable to that event, that may be a sign. The big one is the change in, well, actually, these next three are kind of the big ones. Changes in financial habits. If you're meeting with a veteran and the veteran is starting to disclose, issues with, let's say, bounce checks, or issues with, missed car payments or rent payments or mortgage payments, struggling to pay for food or things of that nature. If your experience with that veteran has been, this veteran is very responsible with finances, has never had an issue missing a bill, and now all of a sudden money seems incredibly tight, that may be, it may be worth asking the follow-up questions. Well, what's happened that's really changed? Individuals who are involved in these scams, particularly if we think of that life cycle, when you're down to the escalation and then the end of the scam, when it reaches that escalation point, and the individual has sent money after money after money, and there's been all of these unfulfilled promises, the individual may start to feel like something is happening, something is not quite right, and there may be shame and embarrassment, that comes along with it. But talking to them about changes in the financial habits, their inability to make a car payment, their struggle to pay their heating bill, may be kind of a gateway. It's one thing that we can look for that's not terribly invasive. If somebody discloses that they're having trouble making their car payment, it's reasonable for us to ask the follow-up question. Has there been any significant change in your household finances? The social isolation is a big one. If somebody has talked about getting together with family members or friends, and now it does not seem as though that's happening, or more often the case, if they have identified one person in their life that it's now becomes their social circle, that is a type of social isolation that could be a telltale sign. The device addiction, I think, is one thing that is really important. If somebody was not a huge chat person on the phone, but now every time you're meeting or interacting, they're checking messages and things of that nature, that's a good indicate. If that's a change in behavior, that's a good indication that something may be going on and is probably worth some additional inquiry. I think looking at the loneliness factor and understanding that it's a very human desire to have connections. The one thing is, if you see an individual withdrawing from their normal, if they belong to a faith community or civic groups, and suddenly they're not engaging in those kind of activities any longer, that may be, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, to indicate that there might be something else at play. So this is, I think, the most difficult part. If we've identified, for example, we've maybe identified, these changes in financial habits. Maybe they've disclosed that they want to help somebody out in an emergency, and it seems very honorable to do that. But if on further inquiry, it's like, it doesn't quite line up. I mean, this is a person that you don't necessarily know that you're suddenly sending money to. When we start to think about these telltale signs, the next thing that we have to do, it's oftentimes easy to put some of these telltale signs to the side and say, well, it's we don't want to pry all that much, that these kind of things may not be that much of an alarm. So when we start to have the conversation about someone we feel like they may be involved in a romance scam or some other type of scam, it's important to be non-judgmental. We really want to acknowledge uh, the relationship. We don't want to victim blame. We want to try to understand that these relationships are coming from a very human desire to form connections. It's just unfortunate that these scammers are exploiting that. So I think it's important to acknowledge the relationship, even if we believe and are convinced, and all the telltale signs indicate that the person on the other end of the scam is not real and is simply exploiting the service member. I think we want to acknowledge the significance of the relationship. The victim has likely devoted a ton of time to the relationship. They've invested emotionally in the relationship. They believe that there is a real person on the other end. And this kind of realization that it may be a scam is a betrayal. And it's going to provoke feelings of loss and feelings of grief. And it's going to lead to feelings of embarrassment and shame. So we don't, even if we know that this is 100% a scam, we don't want to take the approach where we are being judgmental about that. We're blaming the victim. We want to acknowledge the importance of the relationship to them, because to the veteran, that relationship again comes from they've invested the time and effort into it. So we can ask questions that are not going to come across as being judgmental. Have you ever met the person? Are there any connections between other people in your social network and this individual? How did you meet? Maybe have the individual take an inventory of promises kept and promises broken. How many times has this individual said that they're going to come up and visit you, and have they ever visited you? They said that they were going to pay you back, for money that you gave them once, whatever sort of event happened. Have they paid you back? Asking, the victim, have you taken steps to verify the identity? Have you done like a reverse image search? Have you, what kind of research or intel have you gathered on your own, to verify that this person exists? Have there been recent financial transactions that you've made at their request? Have you reviewed, sometimes, and I think this is, a big one, is having the victim take a step back and look at the conversation, the entirety of the conversation, looking back at the text messages. And sometimes that's an important perspective to allow the veteran to come to their own conclusions that, something's just not quite right about this. The important thing to remember is that, we want to empower and support the victim as best we can. And none of these problems are going to be solved in a day. If a veteran comes in and is disclosing that, they're having some financial difficulties and we're able to trace it to some type of romance scam, the important thing to remember is that the problem is not going to be solved in a day. There's a lot of unraveling that's going to have to happen. And it's not just, providing kind of the financial structures to help support the veteran. It's also the emotional piece of it. And it's really important to empower the victim to make sure that they are able to kind of take control of the situation. And the reality is, once the money stops, 10 times out of 10, it's not a 9 times, it's not a 99 out of 100, it is 10 out of 10. Once the money stops, the relationship will stop. And it's hard to convince an individual who's involved in one of these scams to stop offering that support, because there's been so much emotional dependency. So these conversations are difficult to have for sure, but they're really important, because as soon as the veteran is able to acknowledge the fact that maybe something isn't quite right, and maybe they can take steps to further, verify the identity, or really think about, things in terms of promises kept and the promises broken, and the perspective of the whole relationship, they can come to their own conclusion that, yeah, maybe this is a scam. And that can be empowering. It's going to be coupled with, the potential embarrassment and shame and maybe the grief and loss. But we can provide, support to help the veteran get through that. So let's say somebody has become a victim of one of these scams. Well, what do we do? And like I said, the scam is typically going to stop when the money stops. It's just the reality of the way these scams work. Once we've identified that somebody is a victim of a scam, we need to take immediate steps to secure finances. That could be contacting the credit bureaus to put a freeze on credit accounts. That can be contacting the bank and make sure that the account is temporarily frozen, or maybe if the service member has checks that may be exposed, if there's debit cards or things of that nature, shutting all that stuff down and getting new stuff. You want to assess the damage, and this is the big one. I mean, look for fires, look for things that are really are drifting into crisis mode. Are we talking about missed mortgage payments? Are we talking about car payments that are being missed where otherwise they were not? You can have the veteran run. I've got some resources at the end. You can have the veteran run a credit report. I'm a big fan of services like Credit Karma. I don't get any kickback from Credit Karma, but I think it's a great service to kind of monitor. It's not an active forward-looking credit monitoring. It's kind of a passive credit monitoring service, but the veteran can go and check to see if any new accounts have been opened in their name, things of that nature. So it's a way to kind of get a handle on credit, a snapshot in time. We're also entitled to free credit reports every year. Many of us have, banking things that allow us to get a free credit report. I think looking for a credit report is an important step. And then if the veteran is willing to share bank statements, reviewing bank statements just to see unusual transactions, maybe Western Union, MoneyGram type things, and then put supports in place, which I think is really important. Many victims, are feeling a sense of isolation anyway. So there may not be trusted family members that they can rely on, but if there are, with consent and permission, we want to try to bring those family members into the mix, as long as they're trusted family members. I mean, in some instances, we could have family members, looking to exploit the veterans themselves. So that would not be a good choice. But where there is a family member that can be trusted and is trusted by the victim, certainly bringing them into the fold. A financial durable power of attorneys, the DPOA. We do a ton of these at the clinic. Really important, just from the standpoint of getting somebody else, the agent, to give another look at or be able to access, account information and things of that nature. Having an authorized user or a joint account, somebody as a joint owner of an account, can be a help too, just so you have an additional set of eyes keeping track of the finances. When banking rights have been revoked, or when somebody is having difficulty opening up bank accounts, and this happens quite often, there are second chance banking opportunities. I've got a link to some of those at the end of the presentation. Second chance banking does come with a few strings, but if somebody is having trouble establishing banking accounts, the second chance banking opportunities can be really helpful. And we may need to determine whether competency is an issue. Quite frankly, if somebody is having difficulty managing their finances or has become prey to one of these scams, it could be an indication that competency, if not an issue right now, may be an issue going forward. In which case, we may want to look for a fiduciary or a rep payee or something along those lines. And then finally, and this is if there's been identity theft and there are a good number of accounts that have been opened, we can always consider debt settlement or bankruptcy filing to kind of wrap a bow on everything and move on. I want to hit, so again, these are things that we can do. I think the big thing is to take action immediately to secure finances. If you suspect that, and you have the ability to convince the veteran to take steps to secure financing or their finances, I think that's a really critical first step. Even if they're not going to end the relationship, we want to at least end the financial support. And again, once the financial support stops, the relationship typically will also stop. So these are issues, and I talked about them briefly. These are issues that we see, and in some instances, we'll get depending on how the scam has progressed. And the one thing to remember too is that once the scammer gets enough information, that information can be repurposed on the dark web, so to speak. So a veteran being involved in one scam does not mean that that the events are just isolated to that one scam. There could be other things that, start to happen when the wheels are really falling off the wagon. And it could be, this is a fairly common scheme where the veteran is given a check that purports to be a certified check. Veteran deposits the check in his banking account. The scammer requests some cash back through Western Union or whatever. The veteran takes the money out of the account. By the time the bank discovers that the check has not cleared, the veteran has overdrawn his account. And now the bank, will kind of turn and say, well, listen, we're not going to, I've got a veteran right now that I'm working with who's having this problem. The banks report insufficient funds and things of that nature to two services that are out there. 80% of banks and credit unions use one of these two services, and it's worth taking a look on. I do have some resources at the end that can give you a little bit more information. The check system is one, and then early warning services is another. And these are services that if there is an issue with a banking institution, the bank will report it to one of these services. And just like a credit check, if you go, from one bank to another and you go to open an account, if the first bank that you had has like overdraft or bounce checks or things of that nature, you'll get reported to checks or to early warning services. And then when you go to open the account up in the subsequent bank, your request will be denied, right? So that can be very difficult for a veteran that's relying on having a banking institution for their checks to get deposited in, to pay bills and things of that nature. It can be really debilitating. The good news is that these services generate reports, and as consumers, we're entitled to request a report, and we should, particularly if a veteran is having difficulty opening accounts up and they don't want to go the route of a second chance banking account, because just like a credit report, you will have the ability to dispute the information that appears on the report, and in some instances, you can, write a response to a report that may be persuasive to another bank to allow you to open up an account. The other thing that we're seeing is direct deposit issues. Social Security, God love them, had this big push, to get everybody to do direct deposit. An unintended consequence of that is that scammers are out there that are able to get enough information that they can actually go onto Social Security's website and they can change direct deposits. So an individual who's, had their Social Security check deposited in, the same account, all of a sudden, because they've, either disclosed information through a romance scam or through some other scam, there's enough information out there that the scammers are able to redirect Social Security checks. The one thing that you can do is Social Security does have a hold that you can basically put on your account that's going to block change requests. And I would, again, best offense is good defense. I would recommend that any veteran who's receiving Social Security checks make sure that there is a block change request placed on their account so that nobody can go in and change their direct deposit information unless the veteran shows up with ID at a Social Security office. Really critical, very easy to do, and very difficult to unwind, surprisingly enough. So what happens when, and this is the last slide, and then we can open it up for some questions. So what happens, when we've identified somebody, again, we're coming in oftentimes too late. It's the person has already been a victim. There's already consequences that we're trying to deal with, and we are literally putting out fires. One of the first questions, I get is, well, can we sue? Can we bring charges? And, the short answer is no, because these scammers go to such lengths to avoid detection that there is no, even if we have a name, obviously the name that's being used by the scammer is not a real name. It's not, we're not going to be able to locate the individual. And there's oftentimes not enough information, even in the correspondence that's exchanged, that we can identify who this person is. The best thing we can do is report the scams. The FBI, and again, I've got links at the end. The FBI has a cybercrime reporting unit. Federal Trade Commission has a scam reporting unit. And then the Vermont Attorney General also has a consumer assistance program that can help. But the bottom line is, I think the best work that we can do is trying to identify when we believe somebody might be a victim as far upstream as we can possibly get, because it is very difficult, it's very difficult to recover any sort of funds that have been sent. I mean, if we happen to catch it at the moment, I got lucky with one veteran who received a check, a certified check that he had deposited into his account, and he was just about to send money out to the individual to send him the check. And we just happened to have a phone call, and I, was able to instruct him, like, put the brakes on this. I know they're going to call and say, listen, you got to get the cash to me quickly, but tell them that you're going to wait 5 days before you can send it. And sure enough, the check bounced, no harm was done, but it's only because I happened to get him at that particular moment. If I didn't talk to the veteran that day, I guarantee, the money would have been gone. So us being more aware of what to look for, some of the warning signs, the changes in behavior, the changes in financial, the financial behavior of the individual, isolation, addiction to devices, things that might be telltale signs, I think are really important as for what we can look for. And of course, we're here, to provide information, to provide support, to provide help, whatever is necessary. But unfortunately, when it comes to legal action and filing charges, difficult to do. I covered a lot of ground. Obviously, this is being recorded, and I'm happy to make the slides available online. The last slide I have here is just resources. You don't have to bother trying to write these down. They'll be in the program. Those are all active links that will take you to the designated resource